Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to go over 3 steps to making your assets invisible. And I'm going to walk you through an actual process of how to think about it, then how to create an asset protection plan. So let's dive straight on in. Number 1, let's talk about the risk. There's over 100 million filings per year in our judicial system. Over 100 million. And of that 100 million, somewhere between 7 and 20 million are tort claims, which means somebody suing somebody to try to take something out of it. So this is a pretty big situation. And depending on your profession, your risk of getting sued on any year, like let's just talk about doctors, can be between 3 and 7% on average. It could be higher if they're a surgeon. Or if you have a bunch of assets and people can see it, you're going to attract lawsuits like flies, right? You just don't want to be in that situation. You want to reduce it as much as possible. And probably the most effective way to do that is to create security through obscurity, is to remove your name from things. And there's an old adage, which means own nothing, control everything. And that's going to be true for us today. But before we get there, let's talk about the types of liability and why obscurity works and how asset protection works. Because we're not going to rely on just hiding things. We want to make our assets invisible so people can't see them, because if they can't see them, they won't try to take them. But we still have an asset protection plan that works in the event something does happen. And here's things that I can promise you. There's certain types of liabilities that you cannot get away from. So for example, if I drive a car, I am taking a risk each and every day that I could hit another vehicle through not intentionally, just through negligence. I didn't see it, I miss a sign, there's a red light, the sun's in the way, and I cause an accident and I end up being sued. There is nothing I can do about that. You got kids, your kids are out there driving around, your spouse, there's nothing you could do. That is called outside liability. And the reason that we call it outside liability is because it's not the activity that you're doing business-wise or investment-wise that is causing the risk. It is you. And there's nothing I can do except make sure that if that happens, the world in which they can collect against becomes small. And the primary tool we're going to use in all of these, this is an old adage, right? Entities end lawsuits, insurance pays them. You want to have a structure around your assets so that nobody wants to pursue it, but you still have that insurance to pay that lawsuit. And we use a very simple formula. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but let me just reiterate this point of inside and outside. Inside versus outside. Inside liability is if, like, let's say I'm doing a business. Let's just say I'm doing a pizza shop, right? And somebody gets sick from one of my pizzas. For whatever reason, we get some contaminated goods, and we want it to stay inside that box. That is called inside liability, and we want to isolate it. For those of you who are landlords, you know what I'm talking about. Your rental properties create risk. We want to isolate that. Outside liability is me. Me and my family. I'm driving the car, and they come after my pizza shop. I want to make sure that they cannot take my pizza shop. I want to make sure that, to the extent humanly possible, they cannot see what I own, because I don't want to get sued simply because somebody thinks I have deep pockets, which happens way more often than you realize. So armed with this knowledge, we look at that. And then a secondary thing is that whenever we're looking at certain types of assets, there are statutory protections on some of them. We don't want to screw that up. So no matter what we do, we want to have a process and a plan that does not undo certain protections. Let me give you a great example. Florida and Texas have unlimited exclusions on your homestead. In other words, the house that you buy, if it's a $10 million house and you get sued for $10 million, they cannot take your house, no matter how much that house is worth, right? There's an unlimited exclusion. We do not want to undo that. And some people do. They get really kind of crazy. They're like, hey, I'm going to do this and that and the other. I'm going to have this crazy structure offshore, blah, blah, blah. And they end up undoing protections that are already there. Or perhaps they're part of a 401k and ERISA plan where there's protections. And they move it into an IRA where there's not. right? We don't want to do that. In order to make sure that we are making intelligent decisions, we want to engage in a process. At Anderson, where I work, we do something called the risk reduction formula. And it goes like this. I'm just going to write this up. And it looks like this. I'm taking everything and I'm putting it into quadrants. I'm starting over here. I'm going to say this is the active side and this is the passive side. And when I say passive, it means things that I own that I don't work. It's not something I'm doing, the asset's doing the work. On this side, we have active. We have our personal realm, and then we have active businesses, sweat of my brow, things that I'm doing. So the first quadrant is your personal. And this is you, your family, this is your car, maybe your boat, your IRA, your 401k. These are your personal assets. And there's not a whole heck of a lot we're going to do. What we want to do is isolate everything else that could create outside liability and come and have somebody try to take something from you, something that could create liability and bounce over. So here's the other quadrants. We have our businesses. And these are active businesses, right? So if you have a pizza shop, maybe you have a management company for your real estate. Maybe you have a regular trader business, which I'm just going to call the pizza shop. Whatever the case, you're putting your active businesses in that quadrant and you're listing them out. Then we go up to the non-risk asset side. And what we're looking at here is assets that create no risk just by owning them. And this is where your cash is going to be and your brokerage. And I know what some of you guys are already immediately thinking, like, well, cash. No, I'm not talking about a checking account. Your checking account, you could have a small checking account over here. But our big assets, the stuff that it would really hurt if somebody took, these are my future. These are the things that I'm trying to build up. Maybe I have a brokerage account with $700,000 in it. That would be great. If I had a car accident, somebody would be like, thank you for having that in your name. We want to make sure that we are mapping it out and then we're going to isolate it. And then we have risk assets. And the most common risk asset, rental properties. And it could be rentals, it could be duplexes, fourplexes, it could be storage, it could be whatever. Just owning it could cost you pretty much everything. Let me give you an example. Let's say you were a high-powered exec. You're making $500,000 a year, or you're a doctor, or you're a lawyer, you're an accountant, you're an engineer, whatever. You're in a high income bracket. And you say, I heard about these cash flow properties in Indianapolis. I know that those are good things. We've been buying them there for years in North Carolina, Kansas City, and Oklahoma City, and Idaho Falls. Like there's lots of places, Houston. There's lots of places where we buy properties. What if I buy one of those properties in Indy and I buy it for $100,000? Before you scoff at that, that's about anywhere from 100, 150 is where you buy bread and butter, good cash flowing properties. So I am making $500,000 a year. Let's say I got a bunch of money in my retirement, I got a bunch of money in savings, and I go out there and I buy this one property. And you say, what's the worst thing that could happen? Worst thing that could happen is that that one property means they take everything else I have. They come and they take my money, they take my properties, they take my house. I have seen people lose their homes. Homestead exclusions are very different depending on where you live, and they can be really small or they could be unlimited, but there's a range. I've seen people lose them because they didn't know to isolate it. So what's the worst thing that could happen by owning that one property? You could lose everything. They could garnish you for the rest of your life. Oh, but I'll go bankrupt. Maybe, maybe not. You might not be able to. You may be stuck paying this thing. I've garnished people for over a decade when I've collected on judgments. So yes, they can follow you around and continue to try to collect against you, and they could renew it until you are gone, and then they can go after your estate. And I've seen that too. So what we do with that, When we put this formula, we put all this out together, it almost designs itself. We create privacy and we create walls. And the easiest way to think about this is entities are your walls. You're building a fortress. You want to create an entity structure. You want to have good insurance, which would be the moat. And you want to have privacy, which makes it invisible. Think of it like, what was that movie where the ladies all lived, the Amazonians or whatever, and it was Wonder Woman, and they were often, nobody could see where they were, so they lived in peace, right? You want to have that for your assets. You don't want people to be able to see it, you know. So then, if they see it, then they may say, "Boy, that looks really good for me." So, what we do is, let's just say that this is our risk asset. I'm going to make it red, risky, right? I want to put a box around it. I want to make it to where that the liability stays inside that box. I have my business. Let's say that I have a business that creates risk. I want to have a box around it. Maybe I have a management company that does not create risk. It's simply managing my real estate. It manages this box that holds my other assets. I still put a box around it, but it's probably going to be more so for tax purposes and privacy purposes. But when I'm looking at these things, I'm saying, all right, we have risk. I want to isolate that risk. I want to keep my personal stuff separate. Like, I cannot put myself in an LLC. Doesn't exist. Hey, Toby LLC. Does not happen, right? But what I can do is I can put a box around this called a living trust for estate planning purposes, and then I just have all of these entities. Everything is owned by it. Everything else goes in there for ownership. But getting ahead of myself. What I really want to go is say we do the risk reduction formula. We want to own nothing. If I do this correctly, I don't own anything. My own house could be in a privacy trust if I want to get my name off of it. My own house could be in a living trust if I just want to make sure I don't have to go through probate and I don't want to have it sitting in my personal name. I could do that on that quadrant. Business-wise, I'm almost always going to use an LLC or corporation. It's almost always going to be some sort of entity structure that is for an active business. Now, for businesses, when you get into the corporate realm, you're really talking about, do I want to be an S Corp or a C Corp for tax purposes? I can be an LLC, taxed as an S Corp or taxed as a C Corp. In fact, I always joke about people whenever somebody says, hey, how are you taxed? And they say LLC, then I like to make fun of them. And I'm like, hey, that's not a thing. LLCs don't exist to the IRS. They say, tell me what you are. Sole proprietor, which means disregarded if you're personal, or it's disregarded going to a corp. It's going to be, is it a partnership? Is it an S Corp? Is it a C Corp? So I'm probably going to be in LLC taxed as corporation realm, C Corp, S Corp. There's all sorts of factors. There's 1244 stock loss. There's 1202 capital gain exclusion on the sale of things like that. There's the flow through. There's all these tax implications. But from an asset protection standpoint, I want to get that out of my name and make sure it's a separate box. Now, our first step is that risk reduction. So I'm just going to write this up as like, I'll use green. That is step number one. Step number two, once we just say, hey, we want to have boxes around these, is privacy. And that privacy, see if I can spell it, means what can I get out of my name so people cannot see it? And the primary vehicle we are going to use for privacy, and I'll just show you how easy it is. Number one, trusts. Because I can have a trust, and a trust is nothing more than a triangle with a trustee managing an asset for a beneficiary, and I'm the grantor. I'm the person that gave the asset. I gave the, like, let's say I put a house in a trust. I'm the one who granted the house into the trust. That trustee, guess what? I could use a nominee, like a lawyer. I could use an LLC, like a Wyoming LLC that does not exist in the public record. In other words, people don't actually, you don't have to list out who the managers are, the members are, the state doesn't collect it, so nobody sees visibility that I'm associated with it. I could literally do that with my home sitting in here in my personal realm. I could put it in a trust where nobody sees it and make it invisible. I'll just put that as like an invisibility. Put an invisibility cloak on my personal house. What about the due on sale? What about the homestead? Doesn't affect it. It's a grantor trust. It's not going to cause you to lose anything. You could just simply put it into a personal residence privacy trust, and these are very specific. These aren't your traditional land trusts. These are specifically made just to get your name off of your public record. Why would you do that? I know doctors, you tell me, right? I have a very good friend who's a psychologist, or psychiatrist, excuse me. He's going to get mad if I said psychologist, right? But he had folks that were very affected by their mental illness, and he didn't want them showing up at his house at night. So he wanted to make sure his name wasn't in a public record. That was important to him. There's people that say, I just don't want people to know where I live. I don't want people to be able to go search that stuff and go find it. That's how you do it, number one. Number two, let's just go over here like to this brokerage. I could simply put a Wyoming LLC over it. I could set up a Wyoming LLC. If all I wanted to do was get my name off of it, I could do a Wyoming LLC and just have it hold a brokerage account. I could make it completely tax neutral, just disregard it for tax purposes. So it just is ignored. So it's just the same as me owning it. And then inadvertently, somebody always says, well, then I can see what you have. No, I can't search your tax returns. That's not a public record. Well, what about the Corporate Transparency Act? I heard that they're collecting. Not a public record. And by the way, that's on ice anyway. But if I have a Wyoming LLC that holds that brokerage, nobody could see it. It's invisible unless I disclose it. And then invariably somebody says, well, in a lawsuit, you're going to have to tell them everything you own. No. If I get into a car accident, it's not relevant to where I got into a car accident. They're not going to see it. I'm not just going to say, by the way, here's my financial statement. In supplementary proceedings in most jurisdictions, you have to get a judgment, and then you get to start collecting on the judgment and ask questions then. That's years away. I'm not just going to voluntarily say, here's everything I own. Boy, am I a good target for you or what? Right? I don't want people to see what I own and make a judgment on that. I want them to make a judgment on, did I commit negligence that caused them harm, and what is their chance of winning? If they can't see anything, there's another calculation, and I've done this before, but I'll just verbally say this to you. Most lawyers, plaintiff lawyers, look at it and they say, what are the chances of me winning? And then I multiply that by my chances of collecting. So if I have a chance of winning against somebody who has no insurance and no assets, what are the chances I pursue that? Right? I'm probably just going to turn to my insurance and say, hey, what can I get? Because there's nothing. This person's judgment proof. Or you get hurt. Let's say you got hurt by a homeless person, right? You're going to sue the homeless. There's nothing to collect. So what we want to make sure is that when they do this calculation, they don't say, hey, there's a good chance we're going to win. Plus, this guy's loaded. He's got 10 properties in his name. He's got a bunch of assets we can see. He's got a few other LLCs. We think he has money, so our chances of collecting are 100%. No, we want it to be the opposite. We want him to look at it and say, well, there's a chance that we could win this lawsuit, but we can't determine anything about this person. So let's try to get what insurance they have. And that's why I said earlier, entities stop lawsuits, insurance pays the lawsuit. You want to have the insurance. And that's a big part of it. That's going to be our step number 3. But before we get there, we can make privacy for this entity too. Like we could have the house, the rental property, owned by an LLC. And let's say that this is in Indy. So it's in Indy. And it could be held by a Wyoming LLC that is private. Some of you guys are catching on to this now too, because people say, well, wait a second, if I own a property or if I own a business, I have a pizza shop or something else, people could see it, right? Or we have it held by a Wyoming entity that owns the LLC that owns the pizza shop. I can do that. I could very easily. So there I have privacy again. Well, who's listed on the public record? Let's say that I set up ABC LLC in Wyoming. And it could be an S Corp, it could be a C Corp, it could be disregarded, it could be a partnership. Whatever the case. And then I have it own, let's say my pizza shop in my state is a C Corp. I could have it own the shares in that pizza shop, and now all of a sudden people cannot see who owns it, because when you list the shareholders or you list who the members are, actually I'd probably set that up as an LLC, manager managed LLC, or a member managed, even better. In this particular case, I'd have the Wyoming entity own an LLC in the jurisdiction where the pizza shop was, and I would have it be member managed so that the member is listed in the public record. So who gets listed in the public record for the pizza shop is the Wyoming entity. When they look at the Wyoming entity, what do they see? Nothing. My name's not on there. So I now have 3 quadrants that are completely private. I cannot hide from myself. Everybody's always going to know Toby's out there driving the car, right? I can never do anything about that. But what I can do is make sure that everything else, and by the way, that management company, that could easily be a Wyoming entity as well. Taxed as a corp. If I needed a management entity, if I was a trader, or if I'm doing a lot of real estate, maybe I have a family office, I can make that private too. That's step number 2. So step number 1, do your risk reduction formula. Step number 2, create the privacy by using LLCs and trusts. Step number 3, you ready? Is layers. Layers. We want to have the walls. I have the LLCs. I created boxes around my assets. That's number 1. I want to have those walls. Number 2, I want to have insurance as a moat. I'm going to put a moat around it. What kind of insurance? I want to have landlord insurance. I want to have operations insurance. I don't need insurance because that's a non-risk asset. I have personal insurance. And I have a personal umbrella and a commercial umbrella. Usually you get a commercial umbrella if you have a business or traditional business, and it covers you individually. If you do not have a regular business, you're just doing investments, then you get a personal umbrella. And that's a secondary insurance. And by the way, I had an attorney on, a defense attorney, who talked about don't get crazy amounts of umbrella coverage because that may invite lawsuits. If somebody is looking at you as a potential litigant and you have a $10 million umbrella, that may make them put their ears back even further because now they have something else to collect against. Remember, you're not paying it. Insurance pays it. The entity stops the lawsuit. I have a fire on a property, and even if I have a bunch of properties down here and they're all in their own little boxes, pretend that those are separate LLCs. If I have a fire down here, it stays down there. So the entity is the walls. It blocks it, stops the lawsuit. Insurance pays whatever claim there might be. So if I have a fire, if somebody trips and falls or whatever, I want my insurance to pay it. I want my insurance to cover if I get into a car accident. What I don't want them to be able to do is come out here and get my cash. I don't want them to be, I want that to be blocked. They come over here and they come, I want that to be blocked. That's by layering. I have the entity, I have the walls. I have the insurance, then I have a moat. Privacy, I make it all invisible. And so again, you're like Wonder Woman's Island or whatever. I saw that movie, so now it's in my head. But you're like, hey, I can't see it. That's what you want. You do those 3 layers, you're going to have a very, very effective asset protection plan. You're not going to have to do all this crazy stuff, running around trying to go offshore, or you're not trying to, do some funky, there's some really crazy strategies involving irrevocable trusts and things like that. You don't have to go that deep. What I want to be able to do is have a very easy, functional flow that works not just for asset protection, but for tax, business planning, and estate planning. I don't want to cause myself harm when I'm putting these plans together. And so we always, at Anderson, we always do this 3-prong approach. We do the risk reduction formula, we look at privacy, and we layer. That's always what we do. So you end up with a nice structure. In this entire structure, you could end up with maybe an extra 1 tax return, depending on how you're setting it up, whether it's in your interest. Sometimes you want 2 because of lenders and because you might have different types of loans that you're eligible for. But That's beyond the asset protection. That's why we always look, we structure these things out, and we say, what are the trade-offs? What are the benefits? What are the things that we can accomplish just by putting this together? Now, if you want to learn more about this, we teach a tax and asset protection workshop. When I say we, Anderson Business Advisors, almost every weekend. I'll put a link into the show notes. It's absolutely free, but we get into a deep dive on this and show you how the entire structure works from that 4 prongs, not just asset protection, but also tax planning, also business planning, and estate planning. So we hit all 4 during the tax and asset protection workshop. I'll put that link in there so that you can jump to it. And I'll even put another link to another video that I did before, 3 steps to building a passive income empire, how that also works as well, just another mind food. And if you can, do me a huge favor. Put some comments down below. What aspects of this you like, what aspects you have questions on. I'll answer your questions. And then if you can like and subscribe, it really helps our channel out. Thanks, guys.